Welcome back to my channel. It is your hostess, Queen Karizma, and today I'm back with another podcast episode. I hope everyone is having a good day. So, this episode is to discuss Donald Trump's reclassification of marijuana, and I want to get into what this means legally. All right. You may hear some some noise, okay? But I hope you can hear me. Okay. I'm near a tree, so things are falling, whatever. But we're going to keep on going. So I'm not sure if many of you all heard that Trump's reclassification of marijuana happened today. He just signed this into office, reclassifying marijuana from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3. All right. And he basically said that this was for research purposes. Now, since 1970, it has been classified as a Schedule 1 drug alongside heroin and LSD. What that category means is that it's a high potential for abuse. Now, the reclassification does not make it federally legal or affect state level laws on usage. Possession of marijuana is still illegal at the federal level, and those caught with it can still be federally prosecuted. All right. Now, this is, I got my information from CNN and CBS. So I do encourage you to also go and do your research for yourself. What I found interesting was that during this broadcasting, Trump stated that he does not use the drug and he does not plan on using it. And he also allegedly encourages his own children not to use the drug. So that should tell us something right there. If a man that is perceived as ignorant, in a lot of instances, he's smart enough to not use the drug and he's smart enough to tell his own children not to use it. That should be alarming to people, okay? Now, I want to get into just some facts about marijuana, all right? And this is coming from a place of I used to smoke. I used to smoke marijuana. I used to be dependent on it in a lot of ways. And I want to share some of my experiences on what I think about everything as well. So please stay tuned for me to do that. So this is not coming from a place of judgment. This is not coming from a place of condemnation. You are free to do what you want. You are free to teach your kids whatever you want. So this is not coming from that type of place. This is coming from a place of someone who has survived that particular dependency and also have not relapsed on it. Okay, so this is coming from a ex-smoker's perspective. Okay, and I used to smoke it long term due to um, undiagnosed PTSD from surviving a cult, a Black Hebrew Israelite cult that really damaged me mentally and spiritually. And I had some symptoms of anxiety and PTSD, excuse me. And so I began using that after I left the cult, after not using it for about 2 years. All right. So, first, I want to get into what the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, reports that cannabis, how reports on cannabis and how it affects a person. So, basically, people experience different things, right? The effects that it have on a person, one person may not be the effects that it has on another person. So, if one person is okay smoking cannabis or eating cannabis, because that's called edibles, or smoking it, whether you're smoking it through a joint, smoking it in a tobacco cigar wrap, or smoking it through a bong, that's still consuming it. So that's what I'm referring to. So the effects it has on one person will not be the same as another person. The concentration, these are the many factors that affect a person smoking or using cannabis. The concentration level. So If you ever use cannabis, and if you're in a state where it's legal, of course, such as California, where I am, if you've ever gone into a dispensary and you've gone to buy cannabis, there is always a percentage level on the actual bottle or bag or whatever they have the product in. That percentage level is the THC concentration amount. So the higher the concentration, the more risk of harm, right? If it's used frequently, how frequent a person uses cannabis can affect them in a negative way, whether it's used with other drugs. A lot of times we see that cannabis users also use other drugs, whether that's prescription medication, whether it's other illegal drugs, or whether it's alcohol. Many people who use cannabis, they don't just stop there. They have several other drugs and alcohol that they are also using, which can affect and increase the risk of harm. How cannabis is used, as I stated before, the mode of consumption, and this is a direct quote, consuming edibles or products with high THC content or high THC concentration can have delayed or unpredictable effects and increases the risk of overdose or poisoning. Previous experience with cannabis or other drugs can affect you. A person's DNA, or their genes. If somebody has a certain DNA or a certain genetic makeup, it can negatively affect that person as well. And also your sex, whether you're a woman, that does increase your chance of being dizzy or experiencing dizziness after using cannabis compared to men. And that right there, I just want to comment on because it was a lot of instances when I used to smoke, where afterwards I felt dizzy, like almost as if nauseous, almost. I can't explain it, but I used to always feel that way, and I used to smoke quite a lot. Okay, so I used to and experience that dizzy feeling. This is different from the high feeling that a lot of people get. This dizziness is like, for me, it was like as if I was on a boat. It kind of was like seasickness almost. So I don't know if other women experience that, but that is something that I experienced. Now, I want to get into the FDA. The FDA is the Federal Drug Administration. They're the ones who basically, before a prescription drug is available for the public, they test these drugs, either through volunteers wanting to be a volunteer of the trials, right? It's people who do that, who volunteer for these type of drug trials. And so they test them that way with volunteers, human volunteers. Sometimes it's through animals, unfortunately. Drugs are tested through animals to see the side effects and to basically research on the signs and symptoms and the negative effects. So the FDA is that authority who does that. Now, marijuana is not regulated by the FDA. So whatever they give you is what it is. Whatever's in it, it is what it is, right? That's on the person who bought it. You can't sue anybody because, especially if it's legal, who are you going to sue? You don't have any legal rights because you chose to accept the risk of smoking the drug. And that's another negative thing. It's not FDA regulated, so you cannot sue the FDA if you get an adverse effect. You cannot sue anybody. All right. So I just want to throw that out there. So the FDA has approved 2 medications that are lab made using a synthetic chemical that mimics THC, but it's not THC. So the FDA do have drugs that mimic THC, and these are prescription drugs that must be prescribed by a doctor. And this is for patients. such as cancer patients who undergo chemotherapy. Um, Cancer patients usually experience nausea. Okay, I wrote some notes down, so excuse me. They experience nausea, so this prescription drug is to help treat nausea in cancer patients. And for those who are diagnosed with AIDS, who have not who do not have the feeling of eating, who do not feel like eating. This is also called a wasting syndrome. So this synthetic drug is to help those people with autoimmune diseases who really needs something to relieve them of their pain. Not the everyday person who's stressed out because they have to do this, or they don't want to face their problems. This, I'm not talking about that. This prescription is for cancer patients and those with AIDS. All right, that's what the FDA approved. Now, the FDA approved medications, those two medications that I'm talking about, they went through testing, they went through research, they went through everything that they needed to go through to make sure that the prescription medication was okay for usage. That's the good thing about the FDA. They made sure that this is okay. They created the medications. Scientists in the lab created these medications that mimic the effects of THC, but it is not THC. All right. All right. So again, those two FDA approved medications must be prescribed by a licensed healthcare provider, such as a doctor, a nurse practitioner, a physician's assistant, whoever is able to prescribe medications, they can do that. Now, again, as far as regular everyday use, recreational use of cannabis, that is not FDA approved because there has been no research on the medical necessity of cannabis for people who do not have these type of illnesses. All right. I want to also get into what CBD is, all right, because a lot of people, they mix up THC with CBD. And again, this information is from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, otherwise known as the CDC. This is from their research, so please go ahead and go to cdc.gov to learn more about it. Now, CBD is not cannabis. It does not give you a high. CBD is a compound found in cannabis. There are still risks associated with CBD usage. CBD may cause liver damage, irritability, and diarrhea, just to name a few. All right. So, again, going back to Trump's press meeting about reclassifying marijuana from a schedule. Let me go back to my notes here. From Schedule 1 to Schedule 3. Again, marijuana has been classified as Schedule 1 since 1970. And again, that means that Schedule 1 drugs have a high potential for abuse. A high potential for abuse. Since 1970, it was scheduled as a Schedule 1 drug. But he reclassified it from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3, which makes it seem like it's less harmful. And the reason that he said that he did this was for doctors to do research on, guess who? On cannabis users, you. If you smoke or consume cannabis in whatever way you consume it. So you're the lab rats. Anyone who smokes marijuana, anyone who buys marijuana, they keep track of this. All your information is in the system, right? There is easy access for the feds too. But they do this for research purposes, and they have been doing this for a while. So now that it's reclassified, this means that research could basically be more ongoing. It's more open to research because it's not considered as harmful as it was. That's what they're saying. Although it has not changed. Marijuana has not changed. It still has those effects. And I'll get into more of that. But CBD is not cannabis, but that does not mean there's no risk associated with it. All right. So, again, who are the lab rats that the government plans on studying? Well, the general public. The lab rats that have always been the source of research, whether that's through bad food, whether that's through other experiments like the Tuskegee Airmen experiment and they did that for research too, right? And please go look up those research medical research history points. I'm not going to get into it, but the Tuskegee Airmen were um, basically given syphilis, which is a STD. And not only that, they were given this by doctors without their consent. The doctors deceived them and lied to them and said that they were helping them, and they weren't. And then when they started experiencing all these symptoms, including death, these doctors would not prescribe any medication, though there was medication, to relieve them of their symptoms, and they just let them die, all for research purposes. And this is what I'm afraid will happen now. It's going to keep on happening, but now it's just legal. So it looks like it's okay, but everything that's legal is not okay, right? Everything that's legal is not morally right. So I just want to throw that out there. So if you or someone you know experience adverse effects of CBD or marijuana, the CDC suggests that you call your local police station, 911, or your regional or local poison control center at 1-800-222-1222. Again, if you or someone you know is experiencing adverse effects of marijuana or THC products or CBD products, you are suggested and advised to call your local police station or your local and regional police poison control center at 1-800-222-1222. Now let's get into some more facts about cannabis. Let's get into the numbers. Cannabis is the most commonly used federally illegal drug in the United States. Around 52.5 million people use it at least once. I'll repeat that. Around 52.5 million people used it at least once in 2021. 3 in 10 people who use cannabis have cannabis use disorder. And we'll get more into that, what cannabis use disorder is. Just stay into the end. Make sure you hit the like button if you are enjoying this conversation as well. Young people, particularly those under the age of 18, who are initiated into using cannabis, have a greater risk of developing cannabis use disorder. Now, what's so bad about cannabis, right? What's so bad about weed? Oh my goodness. You're just judging us. What's so bad about it? Let's get into it. Cannabis directly affects the sections of the brain responsible for memory, learning, decision making, attention, emotion, reaction time, and coordination. I'll repeat that. Cannabis directly affects the parts of the brain responsible for your memory, responsible for your learning, responsible for how you decide things, the decisions you make, responsible for your attention span, responsible for your emotion. It affects your reaction time, how delayed you are if something happens, right? And your coordination. Basically, coordination is basically putting two and two together. Okay? The long-term or frequent use of cannabis have been linked to increased risk of schizophrenia or psychosis in some people. Those are serious mental health diseases. Schizophrenia and psychosis. I'll repeat that. Long-term use of marijuana or frequent use of marijuana has been directly linked to an increased risk of schizophrenia or psychosis in some people. Cannabis use during pregnancy can increase a woman's risk for pregnancy complications. Pregnant and breastfeeding women should avoid cannabis. Now, what is cannabis use disorder? Because I know I mentioned that before. What's cannabis use disorder? Cannabis use disorder is defined as not being able to stop using cannabis even though it's causing social and health problems in their lives. Cannabis use disorder is defined as not having the ability to stop using cannabis even though it's causing social and health problems in their lives. So the ability to stop using basically is like a drug, it's a drug addiction. So how is this not a Schedule 1? Why did he change it from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3 when it has that significant of a risk for people to be addicted? Again, the general public are the lab rats. He's not smoking it. He's not telling his kids to use cannabis. In fact, they tell their kids to do the opposite because they have this knowledge. And the general public, they're against knowledge. They're against correction. They want to feel good. So why not enable you to feel good so that you can get high? Meanwhile, this is good for who? This is good for cannabis businesses because by Trump scheduling or reclassifying the Schedule 1 drug to Schedule 3, they are not going to be taxed as big as they were before, allegedly. So this is going to give them, cannabis businesses, a tax break, right? And they're going to be able to profit more from addicts and people who cannot stop using cannabis and people who use cannabis and CBD products. So this helps the company, the corporations. It does not help the person suffering from whatever they're suffering from, thinking that cannabis is the answer, because it's not. Now, the risk, again, of cannabis use disorder is greater in young people under 18 or in people who use cannabis more frequently. Now, what are some signs of cannabis use disorder? Let's first get into some numbers here. An estimated 30% of cannabis users are likely to become addicted to cannabis. An estimated 30% of cannabis users are likely to become addicted to cannabis. Again, this is according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC. This is based on their research. Now, some signs of cannabis use disorder includes using more cannabis than intended. Oh, I'm just going to smoke one joint. I'm just going to smoke one blunt. I'm just going to get an eighth. I'm just going to get a quarter, and you walk out with a pound. You walk out with a half or ounce. I mean, not a pound. My God. I don't even know if that's legal. Some people, they will get a pound somehow, but usually it's not legal. You walk in saying, oh, I'm just going to get a quarter today, and I swear I'm not going to smoke it. This is just to relieve my back pain and this and that. Next thing you know, you're a regular customer, and your increments have increased from a quarter to a half to an ounce. Now you're buying an ounce every 2 weeks. That is what that means, using more cannabis than intended. Another sign is craving cannabis. If you crave cannabis. That's a sign that you have cannabis use disorder. Trying to quit but failing. Every time you try to quit, you fail. You relapse. That's a sign of cannabis use disorder. Spending a lot of time using cannabis is another sign. Continuing to use cannabis despite it breaking up your relationships, despite having social issues with friends, you're still using it. You're prioritizing cannabis over your family. You're prioritizing cannabis over spending time with your friends. You've isolated yourself. You're now a recluse who just buy weed and smoke in a house and you never go out. That's what that means. And that brings me to my next point, giving up important activities with friends or family to use cannabis. Hey, come out with us to so-and-so's birthday. Oh, no, I'm okay. I'm just going to be chilling. Really, you just want to smoke. Or you just want to use cannabis without interruption. Because you have made cannabis your best friend, right? That reminds me of that song by Rick James, right? I'm in love with Mary Jane. She's my main thing. She makes me feel all right. She makes my heart sing. Personifying marijuana. Marijuana is your friend. The dispensary is your connect. The next point, using cannabis in high-risk situations. Example of this is smoking a joint or smoking from a bong or eating an edible while you're driving. That's using cannabis in high-risk situations. That is a sign of cannabis use disorder. Needing more cannabis, needing more and more cannabis to get the same high. That's a sign of cannabis use disorder also. Now, people with cannabis use disorder have problems with attention, with memory, and with learning. This is why they no longer think going to school is important. This is why they don't think getting a job is important anymore. This is why they have essentially smoked their life away. Or if they do have a job, they use cannabis all day long, even but on work breaks, lunch breaks, before work, after work. They go into work high. That is also a sign of cannabis use disorder, whether you want to admit it or not. Now, this part of my podcast is more aimed towards believers. And when I say believers, I mean believers in Christ and biblical principles. So if that doesn't, if you're not cool with that, you might want to leave the video now. But for believers, specifically, this goes against what we are suggested to do in the Bible, right? Now, there are many scriptures that talk about sobriety and why it's important to be aware and to watch. What does the Bible mean by watch? Watching is observing, right? Watching is observing. When you're watching, you're not just looking at something, neighborhood watchers. They're watching the neighborhood. They are actively looking and staying alert. Who's coming in? Who's coming out? Who's at the neighbor's house? Where are their packages? This is what watching is. The Bible tells us to be watchful, right? More particular, in 1 Peter 5, it says, quote, "Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, walks about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour." Now, what does that mean? Be sober. That's quite obvious. Be free of drugs, free of fantasies, free of dreams that are distractions. Be alert. Be watchful. That's sobriety. It's not just free of drugs and alcohol or free of the overconsumption of alcohol, because that doesn't mean that you cannot drink alcohol. I want to make that very clear, because some people, they go to the extreme. Oh, you saying we can't drink alcohol? Jesus drank wine. Yeah, in moderation. I think people know exactly what that means, but they just want to argue with someone who's bringing facts and logic. I'm not going to tell you what you want to hear. All right? So for believers, the Bible says, Peter is telling us to be sober and be vigilant, because if somebody out there is a wicked spirit out there watching you and waiting for your downfall. It's somebody at work waiting for your downfall, waiting for you to come in high, waiting for you to smell like weed so you could get fired. There's a police officer waiting for you to drive and smoke. That's a DUI. It's a police officer waiting for you to mess up. And then you get pulled over and they test you. And guess what? They're not just testing for alcohol. They're testing to see if you smoked weed. You smoke cannabis. They're smelling the car. Does the car smell like cannabis? That's an instant DUI, whether cannabis is legal or not. Driving while under the influence, it extends to cannabis usage. Your adversary, whoever is your enemy in your life, whether you know them or not, whether they're visible or not, they are watching you and waiting for you to slip up. This is what that scripture means. Whoever is against you, whoever don't want to see you doing good, whoever is waiting for you to slip, that's your adversary. Your adversary, whoever that person is in your life, is looking, walking. They're actively doing something to get something on you. And in fact, it says they are walking about like a roaring lion, right? So this individual, or this group of individuals, they're actively looking at your social media. They're actively watching you at work. They're actively doing this. They're not just sitting passively saying, oh, no. They want to get rid of you. That's what this means. And they're hungry for it. They're hungry for your destruction. They're waiting. They can't wait to get you. You're not getting that promotion. Guess why? Because I smelled the weed on you when you walked in this office. I could see your eyes. They're red. You're high. I'm reporting you to the supervisor. You're not getting this job. You smell like weed. You're high. Get out of here. This is what that means. They're seeking, they're looking for someone they could devour. They're hungry for it. And guess what? You're that meal. You're that hot meal, that hot steak. Easy target. Because you weren't sober, because you weren't watchful, because you weren't vigilant, because you got distracted, because you wanted to do what everybody else was doing, because you wanted to do what your friends was doing. And now you end up in these situations where you block your opportunity, you block your blessings. You might have to look for another job. You might be charged with a DUI. You might have done something you would have never done had you not overconsumed alcohol, had you not gotten high. Now you wake up and you feel like something's wrong with your body because of the weed that you smoked from somebody else. You see, it's no good things that come from this. Now, again, Trump's reclassification of marijuana was signed today. It was legally signed today to reclassify marijuana from a Schedule 1 drug to a Schedule 3 drug for research purposes. For research purposes, not for medical purposes, for research purposes, to benefit companies and organizations who need research on this. And you are the lab rats We are the lab rats, as we've always been. So, whether you agree with it or not, whether you smoke or not, these are the facts, plain and simple, by a reputable organization, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC. Please do your own research. This video is not to persuade you to not smoke or not take an edible or not smoke out of a bong. You do what you want. It is not my body, it is not my mind, and it is not my soul. So, again, who will this benefit? It will benefit the cannabis companies and organizations who sell cannabis. It will also benefit medical professionals. So you're always going to have a job, whether you are a mental health professional, healthcare administrator like myself, or any other person in the medical field, especially with mental health. Ooh, stay in that field because it's going to be a high demand, and I will be here waiting to take care of those with cannabis use disorder and other mental health issues and drug problems. And I will always have a job because people are not sober and they're not vigilant and they're going to be caught up in this mess. So, with that being said, we do understand that talking constructively, logically, and positively is almost a crime on social media. But we're always going to keep it sugar-free and tell the facts on this channel. So if that is not what you're into, you don't like factual information, you don't like to hear these type of things, it sounds so depressing and judgmental, that's your own point of view. We're going to keep on talking about it on this channel with hopes of provoking thought and positive change. All right. So with that being said, I appreciate everyone who tuned in today. Make sure you share this with somebody who uses cannabis. Make sure you share this with somebody who don't use cannabis. Make sure you share this with someone who you fear may go down the wrong path, because all it takes is one time for a lot of people. And that one time is all that it took for them to die, get a mental illness, have some type of mental breakdown, have some type of heart attack, or anything else. So hopefully this can help somebody. I appreciate y'all. Shout out to my subscribers, my members, and everyone who genuinely supports the channel and the mission. We will continue going. Again, my name is Karizma, and I'm out. Have yourself a great day.